5th, 1998 at 11 a.m. Okay. When did your father begin his practice in Marshall?
1907.
Did he always have an office, or did he make house calls sometimes?
Well, he had an office, but he made house calls too.
Okay.
A lot of house calls.
Did he like drove around Marshall and out of the country and visit people there and looked how they're gone or something?
Did he make it, as you say, around Marshall?
Yeah, around Marshall.
Well, out in the country and in town, yeah. Back when he started as horse and buggy. Or when he started out, he had a horse and buggy, but a lot of times he walked. Then he got a bicycle where he could make house calls in town on a bicycle. And still had his horse and buggy. And then at one time later on he had a motorcycle. And was making a house call down in the country one night. And they had graded the road and some big rocks up in the middle of the road. And the lights went out on the motorcycle, and he hit a rock and knocked him off the motorcycle. So he gave up the motorcycle after that. He didn't use it anymore. Then he, about 1910 or 11, I think it was, he got his first automobile. Still used horse and buggy though, in the winter time when the roads were bad. I can remember he had a barn across the street from our house, and that's where he kept the horses. And he'd put the car up along in the fall because of the roads, and then he'd start using a horse and buggy until about 1st of May. So all winter long he used a horse and buggy most of the time because the roads are so bad. Once in a while he could use a car, but most of the time it was a horse and buggy.
And how long did he work?
Beg your pardon?
And how long did he work?
How long did he work?
Yeah.
You mean then? Or how long did he stay in practice?
Yeah.
Until he died in 1939.
And how many hours a day did he work?
Sometimes he never got home. He was making house calls. He'd be gone sometimes, and there's a lot of sickness, and maybe 2 or 3 days at a time. And he had a driver in the winter time that helped him. He would drive the team or the car, and my dad would sleep between house calls. And then if he's going to be there for a while, maybe going to deliver a baby, why he'd either lay down on a couch, or if they had an extra bed in the house. If they didn't, sometimes he slept in the haymow. And but he was gone a lot of the time and didn't get much sleep.
Yeah. Did people always pay with cash, or did they sometimes exchange goods?
Oh, there's still a lot of bartering. In other words, if they didn't have money, sometimes they'd give the doctor chickens. Or back during the Depression, I can remember during the Depression years that my dad had a crate on the back of his car because he'd go out to make a house call or see somebody. A lot of times they'd pay him with chickens or maybe a pig or something of that sort. And we had a farm, and he'd bring the pigs or chickens back out to the farm.
Yeah. When you went to medical school to get your education, how much education did you have to have before you could be accepted into medical school?
Well, I think at that time, I mean, as I recall, maybe 2 years or 3 years of pre-med. But I didn't start out in medicine. I was an engineer before I started medicine. And I went to Purdue University and got a degree in mechanical engineering. That was 4 years. And then when I decided to study medicine, I spent a year in the graduate school there picking up my pre-med. So I actually put in 5 years before I went to medical school. But when I went to medical school, most everybody that was 4 year. I think it was all 4 year then, pre-med.
How many years was medical school?
4 years.
4 years. about how much did that education cost?
Well, of course, as I said, I went to school during the Depression days, and dollar-wise, things are a lot cheaper, but of course, dollars are hard to come by.
Yeah.
And it cost, when I went to medical school, it probably cost around, counting transportation, because I went to school back east in George Washington University, Washington, D.C., and I traveled backward and forth by train. And it probably cost $5,000 a year. I don't know, that's a rough estimate. It's a lot more than that now.
Yeah. When you first came to Marshall, how many doctors were practicing here?
When I came here, there were 3 other doctors.
Were midwives common, or was that all doctors?
We didn't. Midwives were not, didn't practice in this area during my time. I don't recall anybody being a midwife.
How many hours did you work per week?
Well, for many years I put in, probably well over 100 hours a week.
Wow.
Very
tough.
For a long time there, I'd start out in the morning and make house calls and all that sort of thing. Start in the office. Sometimes it'd be 2 o'clock the next morning before I get out of the office. I usually get out by 10, 11 o'clock. And then still have to I usually had house calls to make or had to go to the hospital. And then it wasn't unusual to get called out at night after you get to bed. You'd have to get out and go again. So it's probably over 100 hours a week, I'd say, for a long, long time.
I have a question. Was it easy for you to go to the university and get this education for a doctor, or was it not easy? Was it hard to come into the universities?
No, it wasn't. You mean to get to medical school then?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't. I'd say it wasn't easy, but I didn't have a problem.
Did you have to take tests or something?
Well, I'll have to tell you a story. I probably got into medical school the most unusual way of anybody that ever did. I applied. My father's a graduate of Indiana University School of Medicine. He was in the first class that graduated there. And that's where he thought I should go. Well, I had gone to Purdue, got my degree, was getting my degree at Purdue, and I wasn't particularly in love with Indiana. There's a lot of rivalry, it still is.
Yeah.
And so, but we went down and talked to the dean at the medical school, and he wasn't very receptive. He told me that I'd have to come down there and spend another 2 or 3 years after I graduated from Purdue in pre-med before I could get into medical school. And so I finally got him to tell me exactly what courses I had to get before I would be accepted. And I said, I can get all those at Purdue. And so he finally grudgingly admitted that I could, so I went in the graduate school, and I was going to spend 2 years there, and I decided that was too long, so got it all in 1 year. I took all I was taking, I think, about 25 hours a semester. And so I applied at Indiana, and they lost my application. Then they found it, and then they this and that and the other thing, and they kept throwing stuff at me. Finally, in March of 1936, and that was the year I was planning on starting medical school, I got a letter from the dean along in March and said that I wasn't accepted because I'd taken a very elementary course in organic chemistry. That's what they blamed it on. Well, I'd taken a 6-hour chemical engineering organic chemistry course and made my grades, so I knew that wasn't, I was just making an excuse. It made me mad, so I got in a car and drove to Bloomington. It was on a Saturday morning. I went from Lafayette down to Bloomington, walked into the dean's office, and I told him who I was. I said, maybe you remember, I came down here with my father and met you. And I said, I got this letter from you today, and I told me I wasn't accepted in your school. And I said, I didn't come down here to argue with you or to plead with you. I said, I just came down here to take this place and stick it and turn around and walk out. So I hadn't applied any place else. But there was a fellow from Marshall by the name of Sam Prevost. And he was a real likable person. And he had gone to Purdue, too. And his dad was a Ford dealer here in Marshall. And he was going into his, was in his junior year at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. So I wrote him a letter that night and told him what the score was and asked him what the possibility was of getting into that school. Told him what my grades were, and I got a letter back from him, and he'd gone and talked to all of the entrance committee, of the faculty, the people that picked the students. And he said, you're in. Just send them $100 to hold your place, maintain your grades, and you're all set. So I thought that this was probably kind of a lousy place if you got in that easy.
Yeah.
But I found out that that year they had 500 applicants, and they took 95. And it was one of the toughest, it was the toughest school I ever went to. The school was founded in about 1820. It's an old school. And the faculty were very, very, I mean, they were top-notch. And if you flunked one subject any time in the 4 years, in other words, you could be a senior and gotten to be a senior and flunked one subject, you were automatically kicked out and could never come back. And you were allowed 2 makeups in 4 years. And they started out with 95 in my class, and we graduated 48. So it was tough. But that's why I got into medical school. It's a long story, but it answers your question.
Okay.
When you first started your practice in Marshall, what were some common illnesses or maybe accidents that you saw?
Well, we had a lot of course, we had a lot of, in spring, every spring we could look forward to having an epidemic of measles, mumps, chickenpox, polio, and it wasn't, you just hated to see springtime come, because we saw a lot of those cases. Now, of course, polio is a thing of the past. Measles, these doctors now that are in here with me, I don't think any of them have ever seen a case of measles. And maybe they have 1 or 2 times, and whooping cough, the rest so on. And of course, we got the immunizations. So the immunization programs has put a stop to all this stuff. We even treated, when I first came into practice, I had cases of typhoid fever. You don't hear of that anymore. The people had drinking well water that was contaminated, and but we don't see that anymore. Of course, you saw pneumonia, and you saw farm accidents, and of course, back in the days before we had Interstate 70 and had Route 40 carrying all that traffic, we had all of this swamped with accidents, automobile accidents off of Route 40. Terrible, terrible mess. And sometimes I'd be working in my offices all night long almost on some of these cases. And it was a mess.
Did a lot of people die from these diseases in that time in spring?
Yes, it did. Polio was, you didn't have too many deaths from measles. The complication of measles mainly is pneumonia. But I was pretty fortunate. Can't think of anybody that I had that didn't make it with measles. I was very fortunate with polio too, and we had some pretty scary times, but across the country there were a lot of people that died from these diseases at that time from complications. But we were pretty fortunate around here. We didn't lose too many people.
When did the immunizations get to Marshall?
Oh, that program set up, I guess, in the late 40s, early 50s. Of course, the polio was in the early 50s, or I don't remember what, it was the 1950s, with the Salk program, and that was, we had a whole mass immunization program through the school system. And the doctors in Clark County got the school program. I guess we kind of pushed this thing, and where we'd go to the school and give all the immunizations one day, and the mass immunizations, and that's been very successful. It's worked pretty well.
Are there any instruments or procedures you used back then that we don't use today?
Oh, I can't think of anything. Of course, we have so many things that we do today that we didn't have back then.
Yeah.
It's been an additive thing. People have accidents and maybe damage and destroy the blood supply to the leg, to the femoral artery, leg amputation. Now you go ahead and put a graft in, and they save the leg.
Yeah.
Of course, your heart, all these heart catheterizations, bypass surgery, all this sort of things, was never dreamed of back when I was getting started, and for many years. There have been more advances in medicine, I think, in the last 30 years than there has been from the beginning of time up until that time. I mean, the advances have been tremendous, and they just keep going on and on. We just new stuff all the time.
When you first started your practice, how often did people go to the doctor?
Well, they probably didn't go as much as they do now. And it usually was, most of the time it was they had an acute illness or they're really sick before they showed up at the doctor's office, which is not the best thing, of course, but...
Yeah.
So they didn't really care in that time?
They really didn't like...
They didn't really care to go to the doctor?
Well, they just tried to take care of it at home. I don't know, that's just the way people were. They doctored themselves.
Do you know what sort of home remedies they had?
Oh... Mostly they take aspirin and some of the old remedies. In fact, I had them used on me when I was a kid. Was if you had a cold, you got either turpentine lard or coal oil or kerosene and lard warmed up and rubbed on your chest, and then put a flannel on and over that. And they used to use, for pneumonia, they had a pneumonia jacket, which was essentially the same thing as a flannel thing that they put around. Of course, people used to drink sassafras tea in the spring because they thought that thinned their blood. I don't know whether you ever heard of that one or not. And I can't think of any other particular home remedies, but there were a lot of them.
the worst epidemic in Marshall? Was there one that just really stands out?
Well, I can't think of pinpoint anyone that was just. I can remember when I was a kid that. In fact, this kid that I played with got meningitis, and they shut the schools down and kept everybody at home. And just that one case, because they had nothing to treat it with. Of course, he survived. We used to have. I failed to mention earlier that one of the other things we had is scarlet fever. We had a lot of scarlet fever, and of course, people were quarantined whenever they had like they had the measles or the scarlet fever or typhoid fever or any of these things. They were quarantined by the board of health. There's a sign you put up on the front of the house, and nobody could go in or come out. The breadwinner, the man that was working, he'd have to stay out, and the mother'd stay and, of course, take care of the kids. But whether they were sick or not, they had to stay in for a certain length of time. And they'd bring their groceries and set them on the front steps. And of course, scarlet fever, you never see that anymore. I mean, once in a while you see somebody comes in that's has strep throat and they've got a rash starting, and that's what scarlet fever was. But of course, we catch that now before it gets to that stage usually. But I can't think of any general epidemic that we had that we closed everything down, except for that, I mentioned that boy with the meningitis.
How were the funds raised to build Cork Medical Center?
They were all donated.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It was well, the people, we told them what started. It was when we got down to there's only 2 doctors here in Marshall. That was Dr. Elias and myself. And he died one night, and that left me. I was the only doctor for the whole east side of the county. And the people got real upset. So they had a town meeting down at Tom's, the dining room. And I was there, and they were talking about going out and getting another doctor in. And I said, well, that's great, but you're not going to get a doctor to come in here and start like I did, or like Dr. Elias did. That's the day of the past. But if you want to do this, we've got a plan, which the doctors in the county have talked about, building, having a facility like this where you're sitting between a doctor's office and a hospital.
Yeah. And
I said, if you want to do that, you'll have to put up the money, and we'll give you the guidance and help you in doing it. So people got together and decided that's what they want to do. So we got to make sure we were on the right track. The State Medical Society gave us paid for a consultant to come in and do a study. And they did that, and they said we were on the right track. What's the matter?
Our tape only runs for half an hour, so we can go ahead and go with it now.
Anyhow, they people just got together and they decided that was a good idea. I mean, after they had this consultant. So they had fundraisers. In the case of the Cork Medical Center, Mrs. Alma Cork was a patient in the nursing home. And her attorney came to me and said that her husband had passed on, that she wanted to give some money first she had it was for the nursing home. But he said, I'm going to talk to her about this medical center, which he did. And so she agreed, and that's the reason it's named Cork. She wanted it named after her husband. And as I recall, she put up $250,000. So then we started, other people contributed. We had a fundraiser campaign. People went out. The also put in, of quite a sum of money. Other industries. I had one lady, she was wanting to be anonymous, and I stopped by and visited her when she's an elderly lady that had never married. And I knew her quite well, and I asked her, I told her what I was wanting to do, and asked her if she would sign a pledge card. And she excused herself and came back in the room pretty soon and handed me a check for $10,000. And but we, school kids sold candy, they did everything. And we got all this money together, and it was all, there was some borrowed money went in, but it was all paid off, and it's all been paid off a long time ago. So it was built with the people's money. I mean, it was no government money, no invested money, and no tax money. And the same thing happened at Casey. They built one at Casey at the same time. And they had a man over there who passed on, and he'd left money, which helped them to get started, and they did the same way that we did here. And we received national notoriety because something like this had never been done any place in the country exactly like this. But our philosophy was that if we had a place like this, we wouldn't get into a crisis like we did back when I was here by myself. That there would be doctors, we'd attract doctors because they don't have to put any money into this. They come in here and don't have to buy equipment and all that sort of thing. And this was operated put it next to next to the Burnside's nursing home because we thought it made sense to have your medical facilities. And it's a big asset to the nursing home because those patients can have access here and they can bring them over for x-rays and lab work, and which you couldn't do before. Yeah. So that's worked.
How much did it cost to build medical center?
As I recall, about $500,000. I think there's 16,000 square feet in here. It's a pretty good size.
Yeah.
Both of them are the same size, one in Casey.
How many doctors were employed here in the beginning?
Dr. Buechler and I at first. Then there's different ones that have been added since then, come and gone. Now we have 3 doctors besides myself. They have room for 4 doctors. There's a full house. So there's Dr. Well, you know who they are, Mackin, Davis and Turner. But when we started out, there were 2 of us, Dr. Jim Buechler and myself, and then we added some more after that. We've always had at least 3 in here, sometimes 4, but we have 4 now.
When did Marshall get their first ambulance?
I have to look back. Of course, we had ambulance service through the undertakers, funeral homes, and that's another story. And they provided good service, but they weren't they weren't trained, medically trained for, like their emergency medical technicians and that sort of thing. Actually, they just provided the service of actually hauling a patient to the hospital or from the accident scene or to the hospital, and had some oxygen, and that was it. And so that was a costly thing for them too, because a lot of times they never got paid. But people say, well, when I die, you're going to bury me, so you get paid then, you see. Yeah. You see what I mean? So, Dr. Buechler and I could see this coming, and we realized that we needed something more than that. And I talked to the funeral directors, and they were wanting to get out of the business. And I got a copy of the law, state law on ambulance service, and what the requirements are, and how you could set one up like in a fire district, and what they assessed, or how much you could collect from taxes, and what the rate was. And I figured that out, that the Marshall Fire District could well support an ambulance service, I mean, with money to spare. So the thing I liked about the law too was that they would provide services within this fire district or without. In other words, they wouldn't have to stop at the line if somebody was over the line.
Yeah.
Which has happened. You've heard about fire departments having to stop because they couldn't go out across the border. So we drew up a proposition on this, a plan for doing this for the fire department, the Marshall Fire District, and their fire board, they didn't want any part of it. So we just kind of put this thing aside. And finally, the undertakers put a notice in the paper that they were going to, and this was back in 1960s. I can't remember exactly, or 1970s. That they were going out of business in 6 months on the midnight of December the 31st. They weren't going to do any more ambulance work. So they issued their ultimatum. Well, nothing happened. And then they started having some meetings at the courthouse, the county. And I were good friends, and I said, and he was going to these meetings, and I said, now Frank, I said, I'm kind of controversial. If I go to that meeting, I'm going to kind of, it's going to be a little, because we'd been kicked back with the fire board. I said, we got a plan how we can do this, and I said, I'll give it to you, and you can take it and present it. But it's your plan, it's not mine or anybody else's. So he did, and he got interested in it. So out of that, they pushed the fire board, and they had to have a referendum to do this. And so they finally called for a referendum to set up an ambulance service. But the notice, I wish I'd have kept that. It was in the paper. It said, we're going to have this referendum for an ambulance service, so we're not very much in favor of it, but then anyhow we're going to have it. That kind of thing. And they didn't want to spend any money on it, so Pierce said the city would take care of the expenses for an election. So they did. They had it on a Saturday. And there wasn't any publicity, and nothing big program of propaganda or anything like that in the paper. Didn't hear much about it. And I had a meeting in Springfield on Saturday, and my wife and I voted absentee ballot, but I remember coming back and I said, I bet that thing got beat. They held it in December. And that's another thing. Just 2 weeks before this ultimatum, before this was going to take place, they waited till the last minute. And I said, I just wonder how bad it's going to get beaten. They got back to Marshall, and that thing passed by about 1,400 to 200, something like that, like a dose of salts. So then they had to be in business by midnight of December the 31st, so they had a town meeting at the City Hall, and they had a new ambulance from a distributor in Indianapolis sitting out front. So I went to the meeting, and there's a lot of people there. And before the meeting, another thing, I might backtrack a little bit, in anticipation of maybe having an ambulance service sometime, Dr. Buechler and I had a bunch of people trained as EMTs already, just all set. So that night at that meeting, they discussed this, and before the meeting, before they started the meeting, Frank Pierce told me, he said, I want to tell you, he says, we had a little meeting of the council down in the corridor down by the restroom, and they've agreed that we'll buy the ambulance and give it to the fire district for $1. So then they had the meeting, a formal meeting, and so they brought this up, and they discussed it and voted on it and passed it, and that made it official. So then the question was, who's going to run this service, whether it's going to have an independent contractor or volunteers. So We told them we had these EMTs already trained, but we needed a coordinator, if somebody would run it. Well, Dr. Turner was in medical, had been in medical school, and he was laid out to make some more money to go back to school. And he was already trained as an EMT. In fact, he was, later was a paramedic. And so he was the meeting, so I went over and talked to him. I said, do you want to run this? And he said, yes. So they loaned one until they could get the new one here, the Amos people did. He brought that out here and got it all outfitted with the linens and the equipment and everything, you know, that we needed. And December the 31st, midnight, they were in business, and they've been going ever since. So that's the way the thing started.
Mm.
And it's we've got one of the best ambulance services in the whole area.
Yeah.
And I got a kick out of it. Several years later, I was in a meeting down there for something or other. These guys on the fire board over there said, "Boy, we're sure proud of our ambulance service. That's sure is a good thing." But this is small town America. That's the way things work. But we have an excellent service here, and I go to meetings at other places, and I get around the country quite a bit, and people know about what we've got here, and they just wonder how we do it, you know, how we get these things done, because there's a lot of places that just don't have this kind of service. And I just got back from a meeting. I was in Springfield yesterday all day at a board meeting on the Illinois Rural Health Association, and we're working on stuff like that for the. And I just got a list of the students we got on the RMed program at the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Rockford. And I'm on that the recruitment and retention committee. We picked the students for this. This is a new program that these people that are picked are on a special track where in their last 2 years of medical school, instead of being in the hospital all the time, they're out with a country doctor, and they're all committed to come back and practicing in rural Illinois in an underserved area. And I'm just getting ready. I just got through writing a letter on each one of them. But there's a lot of things that have happened in rural medicine in the last several years, and we're still working on a lot of stuff. But go ahead, I'm well off the track. Got anything else?
Well, that's fine. We'll pretty much do these questions, but I read part of your book, and there was something in there about your father had one-day clinics to remove tonsils.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember when those took place?
That was back in the 1930s. And the 1930s, I think, that he had an ear, nose, and throat man that he worked with, and instead of people having to go to have it done, they just do it all in one day. They just set it up down at this office downtown. That's the old office building. I think some pictures around here someplace. So I guess they're out in the hall. But anyhow, that's on the town, down on the town, the courthouse square. But they'd bring them in, and then they'd anesthetize them, take the tonsils out, and then they'd keep them for a period of time. And the office that office had 11 rooms in it. There's plenty of room there for them. And then they'd haul them home.
Do you know about how many patients you saw a day during one of those?
Well, in one of those clinics, they'd have 20, 25 people.
Wow.
Which is quite a few.
Yeah.
I have a question too. When you started first practicing here as a doctor, was it really hard for you? Did the people accept you here?
Yeah, it was a little hard. Of course, I was born and raised in Marshall, you know. And people knew me, and maybe that's a bad thing. But no, I tell you, when I started practice, I think if you read anything in the book, I never expected to come back here and practice medicine. To start with, I think you probably know that I didn't want to be a doctor in the first place. I wanted to be an engineer, and that's what I did. My dad and I didn't agree, but when I got out of engineering school in 1935, I was in the depths of the Depression, and you couldn't get a job. There's no jobs available. So I thought, well, rather than starving, I'll go back and see if you do something else. So that's what I did. But I guess because of my interest in the mechanical end of things, that I kind of gravitated toward orthopedic surgery, because that has to do a lot with these different pieces of equipment and different doing your treatment. You use plates and screws and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
you know. So that's what I planned on doing. And when I interned at Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis in 1940. I was there for a year. And I had contact with orthopedic men, surgeons there. In fact, the head of the school, the Department of Orthopedics at Indiana University School of Medicine was one of the people I worked with. So that's what I planned on doing when I got out of service. And I came back. In the meantime, I was married. My wife was assistant supervisor of surgery at Methodist, and we were married before I went into service. I went direct from my internship into the service. And when we got finished out of the service, we had a 2-year-old daughter and no money. And this man who was the head of the orthopedics at Indiana told me he'd save me a place in the residency program, but it only paid $70 a month, and for 3 years with a wife and a kid, I didn't think we could get by on that very long. So we came back here and opened up my dad's office. He died in '39, and started out, and she was my nurse. We had no money. I think I had a little over $1 left when I started. Living with my mother, we didn't even have it. We didn't have anything, and had to start from scratch. And it was kind of hard. First day, go in there and nobody shows up.
Nobody?
And I think there was one patient the first day, Mr. Carroll. He had intestinal flu. I don't remember what he had. He was one of the executives of the old Marathon Oil Company. And, of course, I'd known him. We used to be next-door neighbors when I was growing up. But it wasn't long before, I delivered a baby before I opened my office. And old Dr. Ware, who was an old doctor, he was up in his 80s and still practicing, and he's a good friend. And he asked me if I'd do this delivery. He used to want me to get out of the business. And this girl lived down the south end of town and did a home delivery. And my first delivery back here, done at home, in the middle of the night, came rear end first, breech. Now they don't let you do those anymore unless you're an obstetrician. You have to do, I think they do C-sections now and all those. I used to deliver them. I delivered twins. Now they don't deliver them. I think they do all those C-sections. And I delivered 5 sets of twins in 1 year. But
Were most of the deliveries at home?
well, when I first started out, I did quite a few of them at home, but within a year, about a couple of years or so, I cut that out because it was just too, well, in fact, I didn't think that was good medicine. I think I still, because there's so many things that can happen. And you do have complications even for no reason at all. You have to be ready to be able to take care of those emergencies. And if you're stuck out in the country someplace and at home, you're at a disadvantage. So it's much safer. But still, they do deliver them at home, I guess, but some places. But I delivered a lot of them. I delivered babies when I was in medical school after my junior year. I was required to deliver babies and do home deliveries. I was in Washington, D.C., and I delivered babies within the shadow of the Capitol building there, down in some of the worst places I ever saw. And it was quite an experience. But we were there were 2 of us that go out together, another guy and myself, and we were on our own and taking care of these cases.
Do you have like old sickness records from people who were ill, and you do like fill the blanks and something like that. Do you know what I mean?
I don't quite
Like old records, or maybe instruments that we could get pictures of.
Oh, yeah, I've got there, that right there. That see that table there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an examining table.
Oh, really?
That was
Really?
that was my father's, and I used it for many years. And it's a beautiful piece of furniture. And this here is an instrument cabinet. This is black walnut. This is my dad's. You see how this works?
Wow.
Put your instruments on here.
When you went back to your dad's office to set up your practice here in Marshall, did it cost much to get it set up and going
No, I
again?
didn't have any money. I just used all the old stuff. I don't know what I used to have this something here that I've got so much junk in here now. Well, I used to use this drip ether. Put a mask over the face, and I don't know if I've got an old face mask around there someplace or not. Put it over the face and drip the ether on there, and then they breathe it in and put them to sleep.
Was it dangerous?
Yeah, it could be. You could give them too much, and you had to watch out, and then it's highly explosive. You could blow yourself up with it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, ether's quite. And this is the. You see these ends came up on the table here, and he laid the patient out. There's a pad that went on there.
And people lay on this table?
Yeah, but you had a pad on it. And there were steps that they step up on it. That was your examining table. See, there's the other end. I used that for many years.
And what is this?
Oh, there's just a bunch of pictures I got.
Was it your old office then?
No, that's I was trained well. That's the old railroad station out east of edge of town where the lumber place is. Well, you go. This is Main Street right here, 40. Going east, and you know
Yeah, I think
that's
I know
idle.
what it is.
That's idle store right here. You know where it is.
Yeah, I think I know.
That's where the station is. See that station sitting right there. This is inside the station. You work there. And that's either just I've got stuff all over the place. That's my army thing there.
Oh.
So I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. That's class at Purdue when we got our 50th anniversary.
Lay your stuff out now. Okay. Something new. Well, Dr. Davis.
This is your certificate from the university.
Yeah, for different things.
When you first started practicing, did the medicines, were they already mixed up, or did you have to like make them? Mix them
Well, yeah, they were all. They didn't have to compound prescriptions like they used to. The doctors used to do that back. They had they mixed stuff up and
Yeah.
put it together, but the pharmacists would do that. But your medicines you got were all already. There's something that you probably never seen. You know what's in here?
No.
Now, do you know what those are? You have any idea?
No. Not really.
Story.
Wait a minute, I put these together. You're a baby.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Oh my gosh,
Those
really?
are
They didn't know it
horses.
was this?
Those are horses.
Oh, I can't believe that.
Huh?
Oh my gosh.
You never saw a pair of those before, did you?
That's funny.
You see, you put those in and work your in around that. And he couldn't get it out. And he gently pulled.
You have to make a photo of that.
Okay.
Yeah. You want a picture of those?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you want?
You want to put them someplace where you can...
You want
On that
to sign
table.
on the table? Okay, they got it.
Did you get it?
Yeah, this is the camera. We can scan these pictures into the computer straight from the camera.
Oh,
So.
modern